Hello, you're listening to the Robot Wars History podcast, a podcast where we chart the development of the show and the British robot combat scene in general by looking at key teams and bots. I'm your host Luke, and I'm here to bring you a very special live podcast episode. Joining me as ever is friend of the channel, TaleOfTheToaster.
Hello, of course. At this may or may not be in-person gathering for the discussion of the important robots of Series 5. But we've also got some important guests aside from the usuals like me. Who we got?
We have got, joining us once again, Taz.
Yes, I'm here again after doing the Lost Media one, but I'm actually going to talk about robots, and it's going to be quite interesting.
And making his history podcast debut, RelicRaider.
Hello, I've never done anything like this before, so great.
Have you watched Robot Wars?
No, what is it?
And so, yes, as mentioned, we are taking this wonderful opportunity to discuss such a wonderful topic, the notable bots of Series 5. May as well just get right into it, because there's not a lot to say about these robots outside of their runs. So, where shall we start, lads?
It's fun. We always try to group the robots into, even if they spanned several, we pick the one where they were at their most notable. But then you look at Series 5 and Extreme, where all of the just returning heat winners won again, and S3 got involved for its own podcast. It's like, right, well, there isn't a wild amount of selection here. There's maybe two mainstays that we'll get to talk about at the beginning and the end. So for now, I think we'll start with maybe the most notable robot that we're going to discuss today. Let's have a crack at Fluffy.
Yeah.
Yes, Fluffy. So, bit of Fluffy history, of course. They tried to apply in Series 4 with, I think, Charidis, something like that.
I think we've already demonstrated here the reason why it didn't get in.
Yes.
It was a reserve, if I'm not mistaken, but yeah, we don't regret the change to Fluffy 1 year later.
Yeah. No. Fluffy was a very unique robot for its time. It was a horizontal, but instead of opting for the flywheel design pioneered by Hypnodisc, they are one of, I think, certainly the first British one, and one of the first ones that I can remember that is a horizontal bar spinner, which of course would be the de-rigger for horizontal spinners to come, certainly in the modern day. Fluffy got off to an inauspicious start in Extreme. In its mayhem against Wildfing and another bot will be coming on later, Arnold Terminator. And yeah, Fluffy didn't do much here.
Yeah, I barely remember it was even in that fight, you know what I mean? It's all I remember is it going from the floor flipper into the pit and being like, "Way," and then...
that could have been anyone. It could have just been a static object.
Although, rewatching it, I think they did actually get some hits on Wild Thing. I think they managed to tear up the front just a little bit before it just kind of conked out and then just got pushed into the wall.
Yeah.
And then Arnold just...
show us the tapes, man.
It's all there to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of sums up the whole... That one first fight kind of sums up all of Fluffy's career to come. Incredible damage potential mixed with awful reliability. It would, of course, come off to a far better start in its Series 5 run against 101. Now, 101, of course, by now is pretty outdated and certainly horribly exposed against damaging weapons such as Fluffy. But nevertheless, to destroy a former semi-finalist in this fashion is a fantastic start for Fluffy.
Yeah, 101 was kind of archaic by this point, especially for a seed, as it were. But the one thing that strikes me about this battle is the amount of coverage it actually got. We get a minute of footage for a supposedly 5-minute fight, so it makes you question what actually happened in the intervening time. Did Fluffy die as well?
Yeah, especially as 101 was mobile for about 20 seconds of what we saw.
That must have been a dreadful fight to watch, but they sent in some good coverage, you know what I mean?
But it's like, you look at it nowadays where it's the tried and true horizontal bar spinner design against an aluminium box. It feels almost like Valkyrie versus Triple Crown levels of unfair. But at the time, it really was 101 that was the seeded machine. But it just... you almost misremember it as being more destructive than it was. It wasn't exactly an S3 Plunderbird 5, but as debuts go against something that was historically quite defensive, Fluffy, if it had crashed out in the second round, then it already would have made a pretty good statement for itself at this point. But look at that, they've got more to come as they move into terahertz in the second round. What a brutal run this was for Series 5 heat standards. Just 3 past and future heat winners in a row. We go from 101 to terahertz and made really light work of it.
Yeah, terahertz, of course, certainly in its reboot run would be kind of famous for its ability to stand up to horizontal spinners, but this was before John Reed had really figured out that armour thing. And the best he's got to offer Fluffy is a vacuum hose attachment or something, something like that.
It's got an arrow on it.
Launch device, yeah.
It's there to say, look, a UFO, look over there. Oh, what do you mean? Here's me axe. Yeah, it really wasn't great. Like, we rewatched it the other night, looking out for the kill shot, and well, there was one, but like, he's kind of hidden out of view. Just there's a touch of the bar spinner onto the aluminium, and then some bits fall out. And I think this fight, if anything, it stands less to how impressive Fluffy is, and more just makes people underrate terahertz in Series 5. Because the thing is, it still could have been a heat winner elsewhere. It's not got the same raw power that the Series 6 terahertz would display, but like, it was still fundamentally really sound. Lost to tetanus in the qualifiers apparently, but to help myself out
losing
here.
to Ming 3, let's be honest.
Yeah, but it could have been pretty alright.
My personal favourite thing about the Fluffy terahertz fight is if you watch it from the start, you can see how close terahertz actually moved up to sit next to Fluffy to stop them spinning up. And it's like, that would not
Before the
be legal
fight,
these days. Yeah, before the fight, they were sat next to each other. And that's like painting the red square in the battle box halfway across the bloody box so you can sit there in the middle.
Yeah,
that would not be legal.
Yeah, Fluffy leaving machinery hanging out of terahertz. I mean, it's crazy to look back on, but that was the first time we saw terahertz, and looking back on it now, it's pretty crazy that actually happened, really.
Yeah, and things didn't get any easier for Fluffy in its next fight when it came up against the number 2 seed in Pussycat. And boy, if there's ever a fight which is a what could have been moment, this in Robot Wars, this is certainly among them. Fluffy just tears Pussycat's entire weapon assembly off, basically. But then we also see the first occurrence of what becomes infamous for Fluffy. Well, the first occurrence on a big platform, which is they can't stay in a fight for toffee. They just can't.
Yeah, I think it drove over the flames, and it's because it's petrol driven. I don't know if it's just the weapon that's petrol driven or the whole thing, but that thing died. Like that thing stopped working.
Yeah, it'd be fun if we could catch the Fluffy team down in London or wherever, and we just thought, hey, if you cast your mind back about 22 years, so why did Fluffy die against Pussycat? Because we still don't really know. It is just one of the sadder exits from Robot Wars ever, because Series 5 is a series that really, really lacked surprise upsets on seeds. Like 10 of the 12 heat winners were seeded robots. You have to look at Spawn Again being a lower seed win over Tornado to try and stretch in some extra upsets, but Fluffy, a genuine newcomer, which, let's face it, Bigger Brother really wasn't. Fluffy as a complete newcomer and a new design, winning a heat over a runner-up like Pussycat, that would have just been incredible. And I don't think anyone doubts that as long as it didn't break down, it would have also beat Panic Attack afterwards. We could have had 2 really new designs in Fluffy and S3 in the top 8, but God said no.
Also managed to knock off one of Pussycat's casters as well, and hit the wheel as well in one shot, which was, that's crazy.
It was a really good kill shot, to be fair. It's a shame it wasn't the actual kill shot.
I think basically Fluffy came from the future and it had to be struck down. Like, no one else was doing horizontal bar spinners like this and making such sleek and modern designs. Fluffy would not look that out of place in robot combat today. There's not many you could say that for in Series 5. Like, even I almost like the TV show's attempts to cover up how modern it was. Like, they're calling it a double-headed axe as the weapon.
Yeah, because no one has even thought of the term bar spinner yet.
Yeah, like the pioneer was what, Hammertron technically in Series 3.
Oh, God.
But like they were calling it spinning axes, almost to imply that it's hitting with the bladed ends of the bar spinner, when it doesn't. Like, it hits with the blunt end of the bar spinner, and those are just counterweights to keep it at it. I'm not sure how badly they were needed. Maybe it's just for style, if anything. But like, it's fun to look at Fluffy's bar spinner after you've spent your childhood convinced, oh yeah, they're hitting with the bladed tips there, but actually the blunted ends of Fluffy started to get a bit more bladey themselves and started sticking out with tiny little impactors, and just, yeah, they had me fooled my entire life. But we weren't ready for the bar spinner, we weren't ready for carbide, and it is funny how a future Robot Wars champion was by the large casual fandom of Robot Wars just remembered as the modern day Fluffy. It's like,
Yeah.
we really do have to connect these two out of a lack of better comparisons to make.
Yeah, sadly, Series 5 would prove to be something of Fluffy's kind of, well, certainly its peak in the main series. It did return in Series 6, and it put in a pretty nice performance in its opening melee. Just carved out this horrible looking tear in can opener. Like, it is a filthy shot.
Yeah.
Giving us proper titanium sparks in classic Robot Wars, a rarity. And certainly Demolition Man wasn't going to get in the way. I think what's funny is Fluffy does lose its bar spinner eventually, so if this could only have one winner, it probably would have been double trouble taking it in the end. But Fluffy absolutely left the better impression in that one. In very much an open heat. Like, this was the one where Stinger was a seed, and I don't think Stinger was necessarily supposed to win it. They had Thermidor in there as an opportunity, a newcomer like 13 Black. Fluffy and Can Opener both would be future and past stars, and it's one of those where I think they definitely didn't have a solid plan for who they wanted to win the episode, and Fluffy was probably the best option other than Stinger, I guess. But sure enough, when they met in the second round, it's Stinger that eventually came out on top.
Yeah, Fluffy does do well against Stinger. Like, they certainly daze it pretty badly with the hits, but I mean, Stinger's all thick metal hubs and like very little, well, basically no easy way of getting to the innards, and its weapon is just a big hunk of metal. And against something that struggles with reliability like Fluffy, I mean, that's a terrible thing to have to try and fight.
Yeah, and I think they concussed it, 'cause they like turned one wheel off, and then they hit it again. It came back to life, didn't it?
Yeah.
And then killed it. They should have just left it, really.
I mean, I say reliability, but we do have to give some credit to Stinger. Fluffy starts to slow down, and then Stinger makes sure they're dead by just going ape on him, just banging them over and over again.
It's probably Stinger's best performance after Series 4, really. Like, what else do you call from in Series 5 and Extreme 1? It's not going to be the Series 6. Well, actually, Series 6 opening melee, it does... it gets to notch a win over Thermidor 2 in a revenge match, even if it was probably 13 Black. No, I think Stinger may have done it with an overhead hit, but like...
I thought it was Chompalox, and then it got grabbed.
Maybe thinking of the Series 8 reboot.
We don't know, yeah. Someone killed Thermidor. I
think Stinger, they got a lucky hit that just sort of bashed the top armour, and I think it locked one of the wheels up.
Oh,
that's what it was. But Fluffy, just the perfect target for Stinger, just like low and flat, and just perfect to just get banged.
Just one of those where I think if they fought again, I would put my money on Fluffy. I don't think Stinger could pull it off twice, but it lives in history as quite a genuinely decent Stinger win if you ignore the fact that they were dead for the first minute of the fight. So that's it for Fluffy, but at least they were technically still in Series 6 for their kind of other crowning moment outside of the Series 5 Heat Final, which, to be fair, did also win them the Best Newcomer Award. And I would say, I think Fluffy was the best recipient of a Best Newcomer Award ever. Like, Dan Tomkia got one in Series 6, and they were very, very clearly the best newcomer of that series, but they were also not really a newcomer. They were dancing about in the live circuit for years, and by reaching the top 8, they'd kind of already been awarded at that point. Whereas, I think the Best Newcomer Award is supposed to put potential on someone that could be a future star rather than someone who very demonstrably proved it. Like, Fluffy got to a Heat Final and then nearly beat a runner-up, and it definitely left the impression that Fluffy could have been a future All-Star without necessarily being one yet. It didn't really work out that way, but I think if you look at them in isolation, Tornado and Dan Tonkia, those were just both robots that made the top 8, and then Series 7 never got one. But I think Fluffy as a best newcomer, that's maybe the best one they ever handed out. But let's see how they got the second trophy in the UK versus Germany. Or if you're watching in German Robot Wars, the Deutschland v England special.
Yeah, so, I mean, its first battle against Corkscrew, spoiler alert, Corkscrew is featuring later in this episode. I don't know what to really say about this. From Fluffy's perspective, I will say, they tank Corkscrew's hits pretty well. They take some solid shots on the side, doesn't bother them.
Yeah, it was weird because Corkscrew felt less designed to beat Fluffy, I would have said. Than Fluffy seemed to win that matchup, as it were. But then you look at this year, like Tombstone, Captain Shredder, and the tables have turned in that sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a very un-Robot Wars battle. Big horizontal bar spinner against full body spinner, and its next battle is a classic BattleBots fight basically. Big horizontal bar spinner versus vertical spinner.
Yeah, this is the singular reason why all Robot Wars fans for decades on end believed that horizontal spinners beat vertical spinners. It's nothing to do with the fact like Fluffy had way more range on its bar spinner than 259's little teeth on a big aluminium surface. Like these days, if you're trying to analyze horizontal versus vertical, it just comes down to the power of the weapon. Like there's no distinct advantage really. But here, when we have the massive surface of Fluffy's probably stronger spinner anyway.
Considerably, I would imagine.
Yeah, like 259 had bigger moments in the fights so far. I think 259 had left the better impression just because it was the slightly newer, more fearsome thing that dealt with a brick-like wild thing until it didn't. But Fluffy clearly did have more power in there, and this in a horizontal versus vertical clash, and pretty much the only real instance of one. Like, I guess you could say we had Typhoon 2 versus Exterminator, but that was almost... Fluffy versus 259 felt a bit more representative because it was just the weapons go together, bang, and someone loses off the back of it. Not like Typhoon disabling Exterminator's weapon in one go and then carrying on. This just showed who was the better robot, and Fluffy went in there and mullered it.
Yeah, that kill shot again it's really fantastic to see 219 fly over. I mean, it was basically dead on the spot anyway because its wheels were hanging off, but to see it actually tip over was, especially for the time, that was a great kill shot.
It's pretty much a mirror image of what Son of Y actually did to Nightmare in BattleBots Season 3, just smacked it away.
Some filthy damage as well, like
259. Especially when Mr. Psycho came in as well to just visibly bend the frame of 259, the most damage he ever did.
Yeah, 259's frame, it's a write-off after this fight. Like, it's just one of the sides is entirely bent in, essentially. A good kind of display of Fluffy's damage potential. And then after two big dazzling fights, the UK versus Germany special comes down to Fluffy versus Das Gepäck.
Yes, a robot that wasn't even German.
I don't know what to say about this one.
Well, you've obviously just got to pick a side, and now here in 2022 we finally decide the winner of the UK versus Germany. Like, who actually won?
That is a good question. Well, Fluffy dominated the opening stages, obviously. Caused damage to could you call that a spike? What is that on Das Gepäck?
Yeah, the wikis had to categorise them as spikes.
Oh,
I'm not sure they qualify, but we'll just call them the primary weapons of Das Gepäck were disabled.
Yeah, one of them was hanging off. You go on.
You know, it's like... Whenever I've heard people try to comment on this and pick an individual winner, most people say Das Gepäck, because Fluffy did lose the weapon pretty much within the first minute, and there's a bit of an assumption that after the point of Fluffy weapon going down, Das Gepäck would have controlled the rest of the fight and cleared ahead, and then the cynics will say, oh, they just wanted a draw because they didn't want to pick someone out of England and Germany. to be better, or they don't want Germany winning the episode in the English show, even though it also aired in the German series. I think it was our own Nick that opened my eyes on this one a little bit, because I, like many others, will have, if I had to pick one, I would have gone Daskipak, just because you assume when it's given 4 minutes to outpush a weaponless Fluffy that it would deserve to win. But you know what? I think I would actually give it to Fluffy, which is more a testament to how badly Daskipak did than it is a testament to how well Fluffy did. All it did was turn the weapon on for 40 seconds, rip off Daskipak's little things, and then just hang on in there. But it did, like, it's not like hitting something with a spinner doesn't earn aggression points. That was something I think Robot Wars fans were quite guilty of in judges' decisions. They would put spinners only towards the damage category, and it's taken modern day BattleBots for us to realise, no, yeah, pointing a spinning weapon into your opponent is easier than all the other weapon types, but it is still aggressive.
Yeah.
And most certainly Fluffy wins this on style. We have to factor style in there. There's nothing stylish about Daskipak at all. But Daskipak needed to monster this on control to pull ahead of the minor damage it had sustained, and it really just doesn't. Like, I can't think of any notable Daskipak pushing attack in the whole thing. If anything, Fluffy was still trying to attack without its weapon. It was just ramming into it and swinging the motionless blade about in the air, and they're both kind of neutralised near Sergeant Bash. It's an interesting and notable fight because it ended up in a draw, but wow, there's actually not that much to go off on. I think weirdly I'm Team Fluffy on this, but let us know in the comments if you are still a modern day Daskipak was robbed supporter, because I'd love to hear about it, because I think it's only me and Nick that I've ever heard say Fluffy won.
I think I'd join you guys because part of it's just down to the fact that Fluffy actually survived a bloody fight, because I think it's only this and 101 and technically the Series 7 Melee that it survived anything, you know what I mean? Because,
yeah, that's a very technical survival.
yeah, literally. It's just the judges had their eyes closed.
Yeah, I think I agree. Fluffy win. And then there's the Series 7, but yeah.
I mean, it's a chance to talk about its untelevised qualifier, as we love, because Gyrobot was in there. It's one of the only Series 7 qualifiers we have seen. It's funny though, it absolutely puts massive welts in Gyrobot. This big defensive spinning rim, Fluffy just did what it did to Corkscrew and just said, I don't care for the matchups. I've got the better weapon and I'm going to win it. And Fluffy was actively winning this fight until once again, by Series 7, the issues are not fixed yet. They're back to dying. Gyrobot gets to walk away with a qualifier win, but Fluffy appears anyway in Heat F, where this was Exterminator and Tsunami territory, and Fluffy has kind of always had that tradition in Robot Wars of falling just before it could have made a major upset. Like Series 5, it was beating Pussycat and then it fell. Series 6, I don't doubt that Fluffy could have beaten 13 Black. Like, as long as they got past Stinger, they should have been a heat winner on that occasion.
Yeah.
And then Series 7, you've got Exterminator, who makes the grand final, and Tsunami, who probably would have made the grand final instead of Exterminator if they didn't bod the final. But, like, Fluffy, if they went weapon to weapon with Exterminator, Fluffy wins that every time, surely. They have so much upset potential every time, but this was, sadly, their biggest miss of them all. It just didn't work.
The best thing you can say for Fluffy here is, of the two sitting spin bots in this melee, it's the best one.
Yeah, and Fluffy's fight is probably the least remembered in Heat F, because the whole heat was pretty much just the Exterminator Tsunami show, and they were just going at it. They were both flipping, getting machines out, so the attention was pretty much on them, and Fluffy just obviously, it lost its fight, so obviously it just got lost in the shuffle, really.
Yeah, it could have been a real X Factor in that heat, but
yeah, and it's almost for the best that it wasn't. Like, Fluffy deserved a heat win at some point, but I wouldn't exchange the Exterminator Tsunami runs for the world. Like, Fluffy could have actively made that episode a lot worse by doing well, funnily enough. But they still absolutely, the damage they did to Scary Go Round is still some of Series 7's biggest damage, funnily enough. just by taking a side off it, and no one really knows why they lost drive on one side, but
Probably
they
drove
did.
around
So
the
they
flag.
basically did all the work in this one. Like, they killed off Scary Go Round and then killed themselves. So Killer Carrot and Constrictor just got to kind of play with each other until they were ready to go through. But we definitely really ought to have seen Fluffy in an Annihilator or some kind of side event for Series 7. It was definitely wasted. But that is what it is. It brings its Robot Wars campaign to an end. We're in Extreme 2 at one point in the University Challenge.
God,
There,
I forgot that existed.
official acknowledgement, and that's it.
Yeah, no point covering that fight.
Okay, and so from Fluffy we move on to a bot that Fluffy did indeed fight in Extreme 1. We are of course talking about the brutally snubbed Arnold A Terminator. Now this bot's team had a history, of course. They probably most famous for building probably one of our favourite category of robots, the CV2 and CV3 walkers. With
Big up an arachnid.
Jim Struts and Miss Struts. Not much to say about those two bots. Just like to think about them. They're just really.
They did exist.
They functioned. They successfully walked. The Mistruts
Very,
walked so
very
Anarchy
slowly.
could run.
That's more than you can say for most of walkers.
And they're both undefeated.
Oh God, yeah.
It's hard enough to have one undefeated Robot Wars robot, but Team Arnold Terminator, they had two. And you know what? They get a positive win-loss record with this one as well. It was Arnold Terminator in Series 4 where it got to a heat semi-final and then shortened to Arnold A Terminator for just Extreme, because we didn't see them in Series 5, despite this being the Series 5 Notables podcast. It is including Extreme, we just can't fit that all in the title. But Extreme's definitely where Arnold made its mark, because, blimey, I mean, you've got an Annihilator that's filled with 5 former heat winners, and it's supposed to have a 6th in Wild Thing, and then this just out of nowhere, hello, I'm an aluminium box with a lifter and an axe, and I'm here to make sure there's someone random taking part. And they come.
Yeah, you wouldn't have expected the success in the Mayhem based on their Series 4 run, because their Series 4 run is, let's be honest, pretty crap. Like, they are incredibly lucky to get out of that melee, and then they get bossed in their Series semi-final. So when they enter this Mayhem with big nasty unproven bar spinner Fluffy in there, 2-time semi-finalist by this time, Wild Thing. I don't think anyone was placing bets on Arnold to pull it off, but boy, do they ever.
Yeah, it was very tactical as well. They had the perfect sort of weapon combination to take on Wild Thing's, trap it on its side, and keep it spinning around. And Wild Thing's amazing disc, that great weapon that caused so much damage, obviously presumably broke again. I think the axle must have been too thin on it or something, because it kept snapping every time it came face to face with anything, really. Anything got through his napalm.
Also damaged Dominator 2's tank.
Oh yeah, that was
Oh, big man.
Whoa.
Hey, it won them that fight.
It's funny because Wild Thing's team, they still had time to like complain about the judge's decision. They still believe they were robbed in this one. But I mean, you know, when you put it down to the action between Arnold and Wild Thing, it's pretty 50-50, just like it is with the Wild Thing and S3 stuff. But what often costs Wild Thing in these situations is there was at one point a third robot, be it Spawn again or Fluffy, and you know, Fluffy does just die on its own, but at least Arnold gets to whack it a lot and get some free points before Fluffy's counted out. So they do have a win over Fluffy for a reason. It's probably the reason they also have one over Wild Thing, but still nice to see the proper controlled lifts and axe uses to actually just make one of the biggest upsets in Extreme by taking down Wild Thing and get themselves into an Annihilator with Thermidor 2, Hypno Disc, Pussycat, Exterminator, and even Splinter gets to be a heat winner. It's not a kind environment for this total outsider whatsoever, but that's what makes it so special in the end.
But technically, going in to get vengeance on Exterminator for its Series 4 loss. So,
Oh, you know what? They managed it. That's just like how the Annihilator hides Splinter getting its win over Hypno Disc, and Probably something else you can call it. Who needed revenge on Thermidor?
Oh, well, Thermidor need revenge on Pussycat.
Didn't get it.
Hypnodisc needed revenge on Pussycat as well, and didn't get it.
I don't think they got anything in that one, really, truth be told.
Yeah, they got battered.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, I mean, Arnold in the Annihilator, it's hard because I can't really think of any kind of like standout moments that it has. The way like even like Splinter, well, I guess Pussycat getting the pitting on Hypnodisc and then Splinter getting that. Arnold doesn't really have any of those, but it mostly just sticks in as like Exterminator. Was Hypnodisc, Thermidor, Exterminator all drop out, and then Splinter gets done in by Pussycat. Arnold really just kind of stick around there until its final clash with Pussycat.
Yeah, Arnold gets a lot of credit for its durability in surviving against all of these veterans for 5 matches straight, but they also weren't really targeted at all. And we know that from what occasions they did have of touching Hypnodisc Spinner, they were probably putting in the most work in the pits, repairing themselves every time. It does sound like they were carrying on by a thread, but you know the way in an Annihilator to do well is to not be targeted, and whether it was by virtue of being the worst robot in attendance or by actually competing and avoiding, they did slip under the radar and they kept winning. So you can't knock them for it. The Arnold Terminator has beaten Hypnodisc and Exterminator and Splinter and Thermidor 2 and Wild Thing and Fluffy and Rambot. And it's all by virtue of this little miracle run that gets them all the way to the final.
And they do ultimately lose to Pussycat, but they get that one image of them just capturing Pussycat with the overhead, and that's all you need. That's all people remember.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the one moment I remember of Arnold in that Annihilator. I remember Pussycat's blade falling off, and then the next fight I remember Arnold hugging Pussycat, and that was it.
I suppose Pussycat's disc getting fallen off was a result of it getting stuck under Arnold, right? So that's.
Yeah.
Again, if you pick
call it
one
that.
individual winner of that 3-way battle, then that's how you get the Pussycat win for Arnold. But yeah, it's hard to say why they weren't in Series 5. I don't think we even have explicit confirmation that they tried, but the Disco Inferno, I think, is the only case where they actively competed in Extreme and didn't attempt Series 5. You've got to assume that everyone at least had a go. But yeah, so I think the producers were left to maybe regret not picking Arnold for Series 5 after they saw what fun it was in Extreme, but they'll always get to be an Annihilator runner-up, just like Ripper and Bunny Attack. And
There was a point of discussion where we actually looked at the clip, I think, 3 times. We were checking to see if Arnold A had actually immobilised Hypnodisc, because at the start of the 3rd round, he kind of taps Hypnodisc and then it stops moving, so we kind of rewinded it to see if Hypnodisc had stopped moving from the tap, or if it had actually just not moved. It moved maybe like an inch and then just sort of died. But then the Hypnodisc team supposedly was like, oh yeah, we stopped moving from the hit from Arnold there, so I guess that kind of clarifies that Arnold technically has a KO victory over Hypnodisc.
I'll take it.
Yeah,
That makes up for
yeah.
not getting into Series 5.
I think, officially Hypnodisc was just dead from the outset. They gyrated to the right a little bit before Arnold came in, but I mean, credit to Arnold for going straight for it. I guess that they might as well be the KO recipient. I think Hypnodisc was a dead man walking in that one, but if the teams say it was Arnold in their immediately after defeat interview where they've not had a chance to look at what went wrong, sure, we'll take that one and run with it.
But then Arnold lost drive on one side in that battle, because while the tension's on Hypnodisc moving close to the pit, if you look in the top left corner of the screen by the pit release, Arnold's just going around on one wheel.
Oh, that's ruined it now.
I'm
Arnold
sorry.
deserves nothing.
Sorry.
And so yeah, Arnold, they didn't get in Series 5. I don't know how Heat finalists at best, I guess. Unless they shove him in, I don't know, shove him in the Tornado Heat and they can take out Spawn again or something.
But Arnold is actually still damaged to this day from the Pussycat fight. It was never repaired and it's still got the scars to show for it.
Robo Nerd, of course. Yeah, at least we do know that Arnold Terminator exists in some capacity, and that's pretty cool. So some robots that don't exist in any capacity these days. We've got a pair of Series 5 heat finalists that I think are kind of worth discussing together because they're both remarkably similar. Two of maybe the most surprising heat finalists of the series, with some big wins on lower seeded robots to get that far. You've got the two tablespoon flippers of the Fifth Wars, Prizefighter Mach 2 and Reactor 2. Some oddly similar machines with some oddly weird wins.
I think Prizefighter is probably the more interesting one to talk about, frankly. So we can start with Prizefighter. Obviously, they Series 5 wasn't their first rodeo. They appeared in Series 3 and 4, but the 3 and 4 runs both ended in the first round in pretty mediocre fashion. So I think we'll just move straight on into the.
I don't think anyone really would have expected to see Prizefighter in the Fifth Wars based on how those first two went. We thought, blimey, they're still here and carrying the same Mach 2 name of the one from Series 4, which actively did even worse than Prizefighter 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were certainly meant to be fodder for Thermidor 2. There was a returning heat winner and frankly underseeded, like returning vet. And well.
Never saw that frustrating fight. It was a really frustrating. It was a good fight at the time because it was a shock, as it were, that Thermidor had gone out. And I found it very frustrating watching back because after the first flip of Thermidor, the only flip Thermidor got on Prizefighter, it didn't move in a straight line at all for the rest of the heat. So
yeah, Prizefighter's movement throughout the episode seems pretty laboured, and this one's even crazy. Must have been even crazier for audiences because this is, of course, coming off of Thermidor 2's Extreme Run, where they'd earned a double flip KO in their fight against Behemoth and Stinger. This fight should have been easy pickings for Thermidor, but Prizefighter's kind of rounded shape acts as like a natural self-righting mechanism. So whenever Thermidor gets big, powerful flips in, Prizefighter just rolls right back onto its feet. Meanwhile, when Prizefighter manages to get those little flips in, Thermidor has to flip like 6-7 times to get back over, just bellowing gas the whole way.
Yeah, and Thermidor, when it accelerated, because they didn't have any kind of tail on the back, it would the front would lift. So obviously Prizefighter could just sit there, and Thermidor would just go up the ramp, as it were, and then get flipped over, and then repeat again and again and again until it just killed itself and it flipped itself back over.
Just conking itself out by self-righting.
Thermidor it's the kind of robot that can just barely self-right. It needs a bit of a run-up or a full tank, and it needs to be completely left alone to do it, but Prizefighter did leave it alone to do it. Like, it's one of those where you absolutely don't notice that Prizefighter's dead on one side, not because it was driving well enough to mask it, but because Thermidor was driving badly enough to mask it. I think it's very funny to think that Thermidor and Prizefighter has a modern day equivalent now, and it's Hydra versus Black Dragon on BattleBots, where Hydra is dead on one side from the very, very beginning, but Black Dragon does such a bad job of attacking a dead robot standing that just runs up the flipper for 3 minutes and gets itself killed, and that's what Thermidor did 20 years prior. They had Prizefighter beaten, but they just put themselves on the little tablespoon to get toppled over here and there, and well, whoops, now we've got an upset. Prizefighter is moving on to fight the alien.
Oh god, the alien. Yeah, I mean, I would say that this one looks like it should be a win for the alien, but that illusion is shattered the moment the alien makes contact with Prizefighter, and its spinning bar just stops.
Yeah, against polycarbonate.
Yeah.
Oof. Prizefighter, it was just one flip, wasn't it? One flip. And then a second one to stop the self-righter from working. And then it took a long while to drive over to it again, to inch its way over there. And the only memory I have of this fight, because I must have watched it as a kid, was Sarah crying.
Series 5.
Sorry, Sarah, if you're listening to this
Sarah.
one, we know that you're still about and competing and stuff, but these grown men, these like OBE award recipients of the Prizefighter team, they go out and they make a little girl cry.
Series 5 loves its crying children.
Yeah.
It really does. Yeah, and then that takes us to the Heat final, which almost also shaped up to be a big upset against Wild Thing.
In a rematch from Series 3.
Oh, God.
It was indeed, and it's one of those where with the way it was edited, it raised a lot of controversy. I guess not just the editing, because definitely in the post-match interviews, both
definitely.
Craig Charles and the prizefighter team thought that they'd been robbed. But I guess there's the more interesting question. I think Wild Thing will have deserved the win based on, if you're going to edit something out of the fight, it will just be Wild Thing pushing around a very laboured, dying prizefighter, and that will have awarded damage in the end, which prizefighter didn't really manage to cause. But you almost have to wonder if were prizefighters' mobility issues there from the beginning, from 2 rounds ago? Because if Wild Thing didn't cause the damage, do you actually consider it as damaged on prizefighter?
It wasn't just the mobility, actually. The flipper was halfway open at the end. It was broken. So technically,
that's the primary weapon.
There we go.
That
Primary
was even
weapon's
more.
dead. They had the little spike at the back, which they never used.
They were definitely losing battery life towards the
Oh,
end. Like
yeah,
prizefighter
100%.
made it to the decision of
Barely,
on life
yeah.
support.
Yeah.
But they
Everyone
definitely had
remembers.
the better attacks. There's absolutely no doubt about that one.
Yeah, it's just a bad shape for Wild Thing, because there's no chance of them getting in on the side. And even though they're armoured in plastic, there's just enough armour out the side to fend off that fearsome Wild Thing.
That's 6,000 RPM spinning disc.
I know,
So like 8,000.
the name Prizefighter is very well chosen, because the way their flipper kind of works with those little flicks, it is like a jab. It's not like a big uppercut like Thermidor or something. It is like a little jab that's just able to flick Wild Thing over. I'd hate to think the ramifications of a prizefighter when Chaos 2 flip goes launching them about for 2 minutes, and then prizefighter gets that one little flick under.
It's funny you
That's
say
how
that.
we get another. We've got Fluffy in the top 8. We've got S3, and now we get Prizefighter Mac 2 with its erasing one of the best fights in all time in Chaos 2 Wild Thing to get us Prizefighter beating the champion.
It's funny you say that, because I think the Chaos and Prizefighter team were actually good friends. I think they were both from Ipswich, I believe.
Oh well, George Francis would have just thrown that one out the window. It's funny, Luke, you mentioning the name about the original boxing theme it had, because definitely by Mac 2 they leaned into some kind of planes theme. And it
Yeah.
was enough to, if you didn't see Prizefighter Series 3, you would think Prizefighter was just the name of some fighter jet that you've never heard of, and I certainly bought into that for the longest time.
Yeah, I don't know where the transition came from Mike Tyson to a Spitfire, but Prizefighter has a very it didn't compete after Series 5. It has a very strange postscript kind of epilogue. They tried to enter, I believe, Prizefighter Mac 2, or it might have actually been Prizefighter Series 3.
I'll give you the story, because I was somehow
You're on
involved.
this team,
Oh,
Yes. 2015 Prizefighter Mac 2 shell appears on eBay. Maybe the shell, maybe the whole. I think it was just a shell plus the entire working Prizefighter Series 3 happened to be there when the buyers turned up. So Prizefighter is purchased by a modern day robotics team just before the reboot is announced to become a thing. And so these guys have bought they tried to buy Prizefighter Mac 2, and then when they went to collect it, they basically walked away with Prizefighter 1 as well. And also an additional frame to show that the team were kind of working on a third Prizefighter that just never finished in the end. So when the reboot rolls around, they figured, oh, well, we'll finish it then. And they do actually build, as a successor to that of Roy Alcock and his brigade, a Prizefighter Mac 3 is built and entered into the Series 8 reboot. It actually got accepted, and so would have joined the ranks of Tomahawk and Dan Tomkia as a legacy competitor returning under a new team. Prizefighter Mac 3 was going to be there, but they just burnt out a speed controller and it caught fire like a week before filming and had to drop out. So we almost got the modern day return of Prizefighter, where it could have got yet more unexpected upsets, but the only upset it got was on itself. And then for Series 9 they did some very weird decisions. They abandoned Mac 3 entirely and tried to enter with the original Prizefighter from Series 3 upgraded to have a spinner on the back, and the team also let me be a part of it. Like, I was an applicant for Series 9 as part of the Ironheart 88 team, but I had a kind of unwritten agreement that if Ironheart doesn't get on and Prizefighter Mach 1 does, then I can join them, the Hughes Briscoe family. But unsurprisingly, a Series 3 competitor did not get picked for Series 9, upgrades or otherwise, especially after they'd kind of destroyed the trust with Series 8 and Prizefighter Mach 3 couldn't be there. That's the weird postscript end of the Prizefighter family. It was a mainstay reboot applicant, but it was not to be. It certainly carried them a bit further in the history books than their other Series 5 equivalent of Reactor 2, the other large wedge-shaped robot with a tiny flipper on the end that happened to beat a seed and made a heat final.
Yeah, like Prizefighter, Reactor 2 did make appearances beforehand, but they're not really worth talking about. I like to think of Reactor 2 in its very strange shape as its Prizefighter with booty implants. Just this big bulbous round end that also acts as essentially a natural self-rider, and the little panel flipper in the front.
Yeah, sort of a teardrop shape described by either Jonathan Pierce or Craig Charles. I can't remember, but I know they said it was a teardrop.
Yeah. It certainly made some teardrops out of the Gemini team, that's for sure.
Another crying child in Series 5?
Bot Out of Hell probably had one, actually. It's funny, I think that fight was set up for Bot Out of Hell to win. Like, this big vertical spinner that apparently did loads of damage in the qualifiers. Yeah, let's give it a big bubble target for it to rip into. But oh no, spinner's not allowed to operate, so Reactor will just tip it over.
Was that the case? It wasn't allowed to operate?
Yeah, apparently. Like, we would have thought nothing of this Bot Out of Hell. It was just another round one loser in our eyes until they have one team member who went on to become like an actual known comedian. Can't remember what his name was now.
Daniel Sloss.
Daniel Sloss.
And I think they had links to the All Talk team as well.
Yeah, Daniel Sloss one day in like 2019, he just goes on a podcast to talk about Robot Wars with his comedy mates, and he seemed to remember it like far better than anyone expected. He was clearly involved from the beginning, despite only appearing in Series 5 on a team, but he had all sorts of stuff to say about All Talk's like Series 2 history and how he took away one of the barrels to keep for himself after the gauntlet run and that, and talked about his, I won't guess and say dad, but maybe his dad, working on repairing dead metal in between Series 2 and 3. Like, Daniel Sloss had a lot to say. It was very praiseworthy of Bot Out of Hell, said the spinner did work, made a mockery of some robots in the qualifiers, but was so unsafe and dangerous that it couldn't run in the Fifth Wars by disallowment, and that's why Reactor had an easy time with it. So maybe it could have been them destroying Gemini and subsequently Firestorm if they can make contact with it. But
that's a shame, actually. I'd have really liked to see that. We got with something weaponless.
Yeah, and there's a kind of a theme here. I get Reactor versus Gemini is an upset. I mean, this Gemini is still novel enough and shows enough kind of a potential in sparks to be kind of seen as like a potential top tier bot. But I mean, against Reactor is not a good matchup for Gemini, not in any sense.
I think the wheelie bars really cost it as well. Brian Fountain obviously making the decision at the last minute without testing it, and that's why that happened.
You still really shouldn't. Like, if you have one Gemini that gets stuck on his back end, you should at least be able to use the other Gemini to go in and save it. But there's two separate occasions, both against Napalm and against Reactor, where they really bottled it twice in succession. This is, it's seen as the best fight of the episode in a very poor bunch. Like, this Firestorm episode is not its most remarkable. Reactor getting a win on Gemini was a massive achievement for this unexpected team. You definitely wouldn't have expected the 19th seed or whatever they were to go down like 80, near enough. It's not a very rewatchable fight though. It's great for the Reactor team to get an actual kill on both of the Geminis individually, but it's a slow process getting there. Like, I remember when we were doing the top 100, top 100 fights, the ultimate countdown, you know, we had to discuss Reactor versus Gemini as a candidate when we were going over each series. What did we miss? And we kind of put Reactor Gemini on the list as a candidate just out of assumption that because it was an upset, it was a good fight to talk about. But then, blimey, when we watched it back, we wished we hadn't.
Yeah, it was a slow one, a really endurance fight in the end.
Yeah, very frustrating experience for me watching it as a kid because I was really fond of Gemini and I wanted it to win, and it lost, and we didn't get Firestorm versus Gemini, and I really would have liked to have seen
that definitely would have been a better fight than Firestorm Reactor. At least it ended up with one of the only Utas in the entry gate at the start, but like Reactor can put up absolutely no opposition to Firestorm whatsoever. Like, it was probably the biggest romp in the Heat final stage. It's more just full credit to them for getting there. They got into the top 24 out of 97 or whatever it is. Like, I'm always one number off. Like, big stuff from Reactor to make a Heat final and match the process of Prizefighter. But I think the interesting thing is Prizefighter gets a lot more credit because it's got maybe bigger wins along the way and more active KOs on its part. Like, the Alien was still a more respectable machine than Bot Out of Hell, that's for sure. But, you know, in hindsight, and obviously Prizefighter did much better in the Heat final than Reactor did, but nowadays, if you think who would win in a fight between Reactor and Prizefighter, I'd probably go Reactor, just because at least it reliably drove.
I don't think it'd be a fascinating fight, though.
No, I don't think either robot's getting fully turned over, but yeah, they didn't have any loss of drive hidden in the background like Prizefighter did. They were just going at it and improving and getting... I think it leaves a lot in the producer's mind. If they made a Heat final with a big win on Gemini and then didn't get picked for Series 6 with the actual Reactor 3 successor, like, clearly was a bit of a muted run, but even if the producers didn't like it, Reactor was always discussed on like wiki platforms and podcasts like this. Like, it left enough of an impression to be remembered, more than Rhino would in Series 7. Yes, that was the same team.
Yeah. I thought it had a really nice aesthetic to it, Reactor did. And I was saying this yesterday, I'm pretty sure it's a petrol engine because of the noises it makes. God, that thing is loud. And considering petrol engines often stall when they're turned over, Reactor did pretty well to survive the entire fight, you know, get flipped over a lot of times, and kept working. It's more than we can say for Fluffy, anyway.
Yeah, that's as Toast mentioned, it did indeed. They did indeed enter Rhino, which mostly known for getting battered by Steel Avenger, I think.
Also known for looking nice. It was definitely a visual bot, but they also did kind of deprive us of Supernova having a bit more of a run in that Heat. Again, it's fine because like Steel Avenger making a Heat final is really nice.
Yeah. The
Slam Uta is one of the most notable points of Series 7, and Supernova doing better in that Heat would have just removed it with more traditional spinner excellence. But yeah, Rhino did creep through and they did creep back out again, but it's a nice machine and it looked good.
Pretty much just serves as a punching bag for Storm 2 in that first round melee, and was kind of responsible for Matilda destroying the wall because they went into the CPZ, then Matilda went for them, they missed them, and then the whole wall just didn't shatter. I think just the plexiglass came out from the frame.
Yeah. So there you go. That's the Rhino podcast. a little bonus.
I know you've all been waiting for that one.
I'd have to rewatch the fight, but I think it got under Storm 2 once and flipped it.
Lifted it up.
Lifted it slightly.
A moral victory at least.
Yeah, like exactly. Rhino was actively a worse flipper than Reactor 2. At least that was able to turn things over. Rhino had no stabilizer under the flipper, so as soon as the flipper went up, the rest of Rhino went down.
Yeah.
And had a disc on the back that was described as a fan by Jonathan Pierce, and I don't think it did anything.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of it.
So that leaves us with our final Series 5 Heat finalist. It's time to talk about Corkscrew.
Yeah, definitely paced this one to have the two most notable newcomers of Series 5 at the beginning and the end. Fluffy was notable, Corkscrew was definitely notable as well. Maybe not enough for our like top 100 iconic bots, but at least it was nearly there. It was probably like 101. or 102. Corkscrew is well remembered, and Series 5 was the series where they did the best, but in hindsight, it really shouldn't have been.
No, yeah,
they weren't actually very good in Series 5. It's only in Series 6 where they were a properly frightening machine that just happened to do badly. But they got their little heat final run in Series 7, in Series 5, rather questionably.
Yeah, so the first fight is against a also debuting bot, 13 Black.
The rookies in Blip. The rookies in 13 Black. What's Limpet?
Yeah, and I mean, for 13 Black, it's not a fun matchup because 13 Black's not known as a power hitter or anything, and Corkscrew's just this big tire hub of a thing. Even Hypnodisc isn't getting through that sucker.
And I believe that fight was actually shot twice, I think, because 13 Black had radio interference in the first one, so they had to do it again. But rewatching it, Corkscrew spins, I think, for the only time in the heat.
Yeah.
And it does actually get some good hits on 13 Black, gets a little bit of damage in there, but then of course the blade sticks into 13 Black and they're just stuck together for the rest of the fight.
Yeah, they should have filmed it a third time, shouldn't they?
Yeah. It's particularly as Corkscrew, I think it's fair to say, was winning the fight. It definitely did more damage, but they also were very much immobile. They either lost half of drive or all of it by the time they got stuck together, and 13 Black was actively pulling it around and just feigning Corkscrew's own mobility for the rest of the fight. 13 Black team weren't happy with this one, understandably. I mean, it did go to the judges, so they had to score it on that way, but yeah, Corkscrew, they spun for the only time ever. They did some damage and then lost the spinner and then lost the drive, but they got to creep through because they were never counted out by virtue of 13 Black making them move. So onwards they go to fight Exterminator, another low-key seeding upset of a returning heat winner that was a lower seed in the heat.
Yeah, this one's a strange one. Series 5 Exterminator, kind of on paper, it kind of looked like it should be basically all the benefits of the Series 4 one, but with an axe that can actually do any damage whatsoever here, but they put in a stinker of a performance here.
Yeah, even in the first round, it flipped itself over against Immortalis, which is, oof.
That's a bad sign.
Yeah, literally.
It's disappointing because Exterminator was genuinely really good in Extreme. They were probably the single biggest key player in Arnold Terminator's Annihilator until Pussycat cuts their aerial off. When Exterminator was working in this year, it was really working, but they just did not have functional batteries for this fight for whatever reason, and that means a totally weaponless full-body spinner gets to edge it out on judges or whatever, because at least Corkscrew was moving.
Yeah, Exterminator gets in some nice looking axe blows, but they're not actually doing any damage.
It just damages the little bobblehead on the top.
Yeah.
And it's still more than Corkscrew can say it did. It was just ramming in there. But if Exterminator's not going to move, then yeah, Corkscrew deserves the place in the heat final. Unfortunately for Marlon Pritchard, you're still a few years away from your big moment. We get Corkscrew versus Dominator 2, which again, if Corkscrew could spin, this would be quite a favourable one for them, really. What's a wedge axe supposed to do against this tiny target that's spinning from all angles? If they could just spin, yeah, they're not going to get through the titanium, but they'd be hard for Dominator to hit or damage, and they could just get free hits on the big shell of Dominator itself. This could have been alright for them, but that spinner was never repaired.
No, the whole thing was broken. It didn't take long for Dominator to just topple them over just by driving at them. Really, I don't think they hit them with the axe once.
One of the that's one of my favourite categories of Robot Wars KOs. Accidental wedge overturn KOs from bots where the wedge is not the point of them.
At least with Roadblock, that was the idea, but Dominator winning by flip is that's a point in its history.
And thank God they got that flip, because if this went to the judges of Dominator 2 just trying to hit them but not actually doing enough damage or on overhead, that could have been a stinker.
course,
Yeah,
game
not
over
bad.
for corkscrew on its side, no remake. Flipped by the flipper that rips off the cork top, and then they get tipped over onto the flame pit, and then the petrol engine bursts into
Once
flames.
again, it's
Another
a petrol engine.
Oh,
I mean, it's tradition in this podcast now. We've got to find a way for them to get top 8, and it's not that hard to do, actually. If Corkscrew somehow beats Dominator, that's the bigger question than it is them beating Wheelie Big Cheese, which would have broken down at some point. But as long as Corkscrew stayed upright, the top 8 could have awaited for them. But yeah, Dominator was a no-go as soon as the weapon was turned off.
And so we kind of move from Series 5 Corkscrew to easily their most impressive form, kind of infamously, Series 6 Corkscrew. We only see this in the main series for about probably 30 seconds. And in that 30 seconds, it does very significant damage to almost every other bot in the arena.
Also, trading in its green paint job for a blue one and getting rid of the kill.
Much more iconic.
Looks so much better.
It does look far better.
And getting rid of the kill because apparently that pushed it over the weight limit.
But this thing, man, it rips off an entire side skirt of Panic Attack. It tears off the entire wheel cover of Chronic.
It gives a big old leak on rocks. Like, it's hard to see the visual damage of that thing because it's already looking visually damaged. But they do hit it and it comes off worse.
Breaks Chronic 2's top flipper, I think, as well.
Oh, yeah.
It sticks up and then it doesn't go down for the rest of the fight.
Yeah,
And then, of course,
And then they just basically said, change the world. Off we go. Series 6 was not meant to have a corkscrew run, sadly. Like, down goes the pit and down goes corkscrew with it.
Assuming they weren't hit by reliability gremlins, which who knows? I would be pretty comfortable giving them the win in the series semi-final. And then against this version of Terahertz, I don't trust this version of Terahertz to
Yeah, it basically depends who they go through in place of. We're assuming if Corkscrew were to not go down the pit, they're probably going through at Panic Attack's expense, because Chronic 2 does eventually flip Panic Attack over and leaves it for dead. Maybe Corkscrew could have killed off Chronic 2 first if it wanted to, but I think we're assuming it takes Panic Attack's place and makes a mockery of A-Kill. But yeah, once again, Terahertz, it's in that category with Series 7 Exterminator and Series 5 Pussycat, where it was moments away from meeting a very bad matchup that could have cost it its grand final run. Like, yeah, Exterminator could have met Fluffy and Terahertz could have met Corkscrew, where I think a lot of people, based on the Fluffy encounter of Series 5, do think Corkscrew could have had it, because it's very hard to hit or damage. It has a lot more damage output itself. They could have just ripped into the sides of Terahertz and been hard to hit, and maybe, yeah, the spinner could have just gone down or whatever, and then Terahertz gets away with it. But Corkscrew really could have been quite a menace in this episode, and it's another what-if scenario where, again, I don't think we trade Terahertz's run for the world. I'd rather just have that than a Corkscrew run to successes. But yeah, it's certainly, out of all the round 1 losers in Series 6, I think Corkscrew probably left the best impression out of all of them, alongside GBH, I guess. But, it was enough to make it worth inviting Corkscrew to another Series 6 episode. It's funny how much overlap there is with the UK versus Germany, but I've already discussed how Fluffy just straight up outdid them.
Yeah, Corkscrew's shell, but can tank. I'd say it could probably tank almost anything the Classic Series can throw at it from a damage perspective, but the internal knocks it does just kills Corkscrew dead very quickly. And then they come back for Series 7 with Corkscrew 2, which might have been interesting if it worked properly, but it doesn't, so it gets thrown out very quickly.
Yeah, even a working Corkscrew 2 would still look less visually impressive than Corkscrew's big full-body spinner did. Like, that was a thin sheet of metal for a spinner, going at stated speeds of 1,500 RPM. Like, even a working Corkscrew 2, I don't think would have been better than Corkscrew, but I guess we'll never know. Maybe it was alright, but I must admit, like, anything that helps mute is good for me, for starters. I think Judge Shred 3's little post-box ooter on Corkscrew 2 is low-key, like, one of my favourites ever. Just take this little circle and pancake flip it over the wall.
It was a really interesting way to flip it out. Yeah.
Just kind of came out of nowhere. Even
Yeah.
Jonathan Pierce was just like, ah. Just the focus on
Don't forget Robot Wars fans!
Most of the attention was on Demolition Man getting counted out, and then there's Corkscrew's out as well, and that was it.
I don't want to end this episode on the Corkscrew 2 loss, so I will just mention that Corkscrew had quite a long kind of life in the UK live scene. Obviously, once they removed spinners, they replaced the spinner weapon with an axe, and I
don't think it was the Corkscrew team doing it.
the Corkscrew
been sold on, but it's touched a lot of roboteering teams in its time. I don't think we know anything about how good Hammer Time was with that hammer, but it's just amusing how far Corkscrew 2's lineage extends. This one-time disappointing competitor in Series 7 that basically took the place of the Corkscrew that people liked a lot more, was both an applicant for Series 10 and an actual competitor in Clashbots in China, where the body of Corkscrew 2 remains to this day. It must have swapped through loads of different teams, but where it ended up in the reboot era was with Team Tilly, Shane Lale, the driver of Mega Mouse on the show, and then the driver of a lot more out of that, most notably Iron All 6. He got to be the UK champion with that. But Series 10, after they competed with Mega Mouse, they wanted to finally compete with their own robot, and Dizzy Tilly was to be a full-body spinner, housing the guts of Corkscrew 2 after all this time. Certainly it didn't get picked, but they did make it anyway, and Clashbots were willing to take it on, and Corkscrew 2 took the international leap in the reboot era, where it got to lose to whatever the hell it lost to, and never left China again.
I think we might have actually forgotten that Corkscrew was in the Commonwealth Carnage as well.
Oh, heck yeah, that was...
I
was thinking, why
actually,
was the Series 6 Corkscrew so iconic off of 2 fights? But no, it was in Extreme 2. Thanks for that one, Taz. Where he gets to be untouched by Firestorm and then rip up Matilda.
Representing Scotland, of course, and actually getting, for some reason, untelevised attack on Weldor 3 that twisted its chassis up, causing it to not self-right, and then ripping a panel off of Bondi Titch. And then when Weldor and Bondi Titch have gone out of the arena, they just tear off a part of Matilda as well.
Yeah, that was an iconic attack. They probably annoyed the ex-Roboteers a fair bit, because it's quite a decorative shell that ripped apart, and it broke her as well.
You don't have too many spares for that one, and it's not exactly hard to cut through a decorative fiberglass shell, but Corkscrew did enough actual damage to real competitors in the fight that you can treat it as a big attack from it. Certainly they were it set themselves up as probably the favourites going into the Crustacean fight in the second round. I think everyone to this day would, you wouldn't, if we never saw the two robots fight, you would probably pick Corkscrew to win that one. Yeah,
Crustacean's claws they just look destined to get immobilized, wrecked in the first impact. But it turns out that Corkscrew's teeth are actually perfectly placed for a Crustacean to just grab onto, and they just grab him, take him straight to the pit button, and dump him straight in the pit. It's just an incredibly strange win.
Yeah, just only had to stop the spinning momentum once, and then blimey, that was it.
It's fascinating how many things actually fit in those crustacean claws. They look like a really specialised weapon, but they can take on almost anyone, as it were, like Behemoth, Chaos 2,
Ironside 3.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's more what you expect when you put Crustacean against a horizontal spinner. Supernova maybe a bit more time-sensitive example, but Corkscrew wasn't enough, and off they went. Third place in an international competition, we'll call it. So, wow, we've had Corkscrew representing Scotland in the Commonwealth Carnage, and then the UK in general over in China. I don't think John Heatley will quite be aware of that, but at least we've checked in on him. He finally sold the Corkscrew shell on eBay in 2021.
Right at the very end, in December. Literally on maybe the 30th of December.
Yeah, definitely not like the Robot Wars spec. It had clearly had a bit of a live circuit time. I think in 2003, basically, when they couldn't compete with it spinning, they still just upgraded it a bit to work more as a sit and spin, and then that's what rests with Liam Bryant and coming to RoboNerd this day. You know, we can bring Arnold, Terminator, and Corkscrew together. The podcast is becoming real. Shame we can't find Fluffy, and I don't think we'll ask the prize fighter posse at this point. They seem to have disappeared.
Yeah, and then and then John Heatley obviously modifying Corkscrew Shell by putting some weird yellow spiral around to sort of serve as a battering ram, and obviously it can't spin in the live events, and there's a really sad fight with M2 where it just bumps M2.
I'm not calling that sad by any
And then M2 just flips it over, and then it's done.
Classic attack from the lovely M2. You love to see it.
All right, well, I think that's as strong a point as any to finish up on. Our in-depth, great discussion on the notable
Look forward
box
to
of
the
Series
2.5 hour Series 7 notables.
Tale of the Toaster solo episode, that one. But until we reach that 5-parter on M2's Series 7 run, I have been your host Luke. With me has been Toast.
Of course. I guess the one thing, it doesn't sound like a bit of a muted cast of the most notable bots of Series 5 to say that Fluffy and Corkscrew were the best. I think secretly there was one more Series 5 debutant that doesn't get its own podcast but was a little bit more notable. That would be Big Nipper. They technically got to be a Series 5 debutant. We'll lump them in with the reboot cast or Series 7, but this podcast does leave a bit of a sour impression for the newcomer quality of Series 5. I don't think Prizefighter and Reactor would quite make podcast level if there wasn't a shortage. But you know what? At least Series 5 did bring us Sabretooth and Big Nipper that would qualify as more notable based on other
13
series.
Black too.
13 Black did debut in Series 5, you're right. So the makings of bots were in there. Just maybe not within Series 5 itself. So props to Corkscrew, props to Fluffy and all the others. And to us for remembering them. So thanks for listening. See you in another one.
See ya.
See ya.
See you later.